Culbert lay in his bed with no idea of the horror taking place on the other side of the wall. He was sharing his home with a man who would become known as the Suitcase Killer. The victim was their young female housemate. Now, Phillip is tormented by the thought that he could have saved her life if only he'd realised what was happening. This is his story.
He was always going to kill. It was just a matter of who.
Noticed a black suitcase floating in a stormwater canal.
All the thought I've given her, that was her last cry for help.
Inside were human remains.
He shouldn't have been walking the street. Here I'm thinking I'm a witness, and the police are looking at me like I'm a suspect.
It affected most police investigating this.
Why didn't that grab hold of me? Why didn't I realise that she was in trouble?
Phillip, thanks for talking to us. Let's go back to the beginning. March 9th, 2011 is a day burned in Phillip Culbert's memory. Living in a boarding house with two other tenants, it started out like any other. But by the end of that fateful day, a young girl would be dead, and Phillip, unwittingly both prime suspect and key witness in her murder. How long had you lived in Edwin Street?
I'd been there about 6 months before Tosha moved in there, and then Daniel moved in about 4 months after Tosha.
And so had you formed a bit of a rapport with Tosha in those few months that you'd been there together?
Yeah, well, Tosha's the same age as my daughter. She was a lovely person, she was bright. She had lots of friends.
Tosha Thakkar was a 24-year-old Indian student with her whole life ahead of her. On a student's budget, she found herself living in this 3-bedroom boarding house in the Sydney suburb of Croydon, alongside Phillip and 19-year-old Daniel Stani-Reginald.
I didn't have a lot to do with him. I said hello to him and how you going, where do you work, all the normal sorts of things. I didn't normally see him much, except for those times coming in and out.
Unwittingly, Phillip and Tosha were living next to a man plotting a murder. 3 months after Stani-Reginald moved in, he began obsessively scouring the internet, researching serial killers and murderers. He was just waiting to pick his victim.
I was going to work every morning, say 2 o'clock. I'd go out and I'd make sure the back door was locked. Then I'd make sure the lock on the second door was locked. And all the time I'm locking her in with this mongrel. Whenever he felt like striking, he was ready.
On that day, Phillip was at work. The killer chose his moment to strike. He approached Tosha as she walked the 5 metres from the shower to her bedroom and held her captive in her own room. Over 2 hours, Stani-Reginald raped and tortured the young student until Phillip got home. You heard music coming from her room when you first came
When
home.
I arrived home from work, her light was on, the music was playing.
Was that unusual that it was playing
No,
loudly?
well, the previous 2 or 3 days when I got home, she'd had a few of her friends there. And, the music was only sort of normal loud. It wasn't extra loud or anything. As the police asked me, thought he might have turned it right up to make it really loud. But then if he'd have done that, maybe I'd have attracted my attention and checked it.
You now know that he was doing that to cover the noises of what he was doing in there.
Yeah, exactly.
That is chilling. But what he heard next will haunt him forever. You heard her cry out at one point, didn't you?
Not cry out, it was like a humming sound. And if I heard her cry out, well, I would have been straight in there. This is the whole point. It wasn't a sound like from her friends being there that you would look as suspicious. It sounded like a sort of humming sound.
As I'm sitting here listening to you, I can't help thinking about what she was probably going through when she made that sound.
Yeah, I think he was killing her. And as I said, you talk about chilling, that's the hardest thing for me. I'm sure now, all the thought I've given her, that was her last cry for help. This is the room Tosha was staying in. So my bed is in the same position on the other side.
Well, I mean, the wall's only probably this thick. You're really only... You're inches away if your head is on...
Exactly, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was 2-3 feet. That's what I was saying to you all the time. This is hard. I've had trouble getting my head around, the fact that I was that close and it's all happening, but there was nothing, I didn't pick up on anything.
What Phillip couldn't know back then was that this wasn't Stani-Reginald's first attack on a young woman. He had numerous prior convictions, all offences of violence. This disturbing interview with police from an earlier matter records his response.
Yeah, I saw this girl. She was alone, and then I followed her for a while, and then I ran up to her and I pulled the knife out and I said, "Give me your money." And then she just started screaming. And then I hit her.
Why did you hit her?
I don't really know why.
Did you want to shut her up, or?
I think so, yeah.
Why did you do what you did?
Because I wanted some money.
Did you know what you were doing was wrong?
What do you mean?
Do you know the difference between the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do? Was what you did right or wrong?
It was wrong.
And how do you feel today about what you did?
What do you mean?
Do you feel sorry for the girls that you attacked?
Yeah.
You do?
A chilling prelude to the murder he would later commit.
People who are capable of committing this sort of crime, you will always find have a history of other sorts of crimes involving violence.
Lawyer Sam Macedoni says Stani-Reginald's criminal history was leading him straight to prison.
Convictions of assault, robbery, using an offensive weapon and destroying property by fire. He was given every opportunity to change his ways and to rehabilitate, but he didn't take it.
So what happened? You know, if any parent in this country has got to ask, how does the guy does all these attacks, how does he walk in the streets? And if he is walking the streets, shouldn't there be somebody after his record, the fact that people look at the system's failed. The police warned the authorities that if you let this guy out, he's going to re-offend. 6 months later, Tosha's dead.
So let's go to the point where the police are knocking on the door. What happens then?
When they turned up, they wanted to search everywhere.
How long before you became aware that you were a suspect, before the police indicated that to you?
That night, I picked my daughter up from uni. I told her everything that had happened because I knew there was going to be police there when we got home. And my daughter says, "Dad, you'd be a suspect." And I'm going, "Oh, yeah, I suppose I would be." "No, Dad, you'd be number one suspect." And then when I got out of the car and walked back and all these police are standing there, I looked at everything differently. Because here I'm thinking I'm a witness and the police are looking at me like I'm a suspect.
How did it feel to you to be a suspect in this?
Worst thing in my life.
Have you got over that yet?
I know I've got to put it behind me because it's been a strain. And for me not to pick up on this, I really feel like I failed. You know, that I failed, that I didn't...
Phillip, you know, you carry no burden here. You should not carry a burden here. In the next stage of Stani-Reginald's calculated plan, he calmly ordered a taxi. What you're about to hear is the ice-cold phone call he made just moments after he killed.
Hi, I have a pick up from Croydon on Edwin Street. How long did that take?
I don't know. How many travelling?
Just the one.
And your name?
Daniel.
Going to where?
Melrose Park.
Ready now?
I will be in about 10 minutes.
Okay, no worries. First available go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You thought you heard him taking her out of here in the suitcase, didn't you? Phillip's evidence would fast put him in the position of key witness to the crime.
Well, my testimony to the police was that I was in there with my brother and we were talking and we heard a bang out here. And then later on, after I heard the bang came out, his chair was pushed right hard against that. And what the police think it was, as he's coming out with his bag, he's hit that with her body in.
To a taxi he'd ordered earlier. He even allows the driver to help him with the heavy suitcase, the battered body stuffed inside.
They drove to Meadowbank Park and he walked away. There, he dumped the bag in a canal.
It would be 2 days before the suitcase and Tosha's body were discovered.
It was calm, it was calculated, there is no evidence of an existing mental illness, it was not impulsive. So he was actually orchestrating the full completion of this murder and how to dispose of the body.
Forensic psychologist Sandy Ray says his brazen behaviour suggests he was playing out a fantasy.
These offenders are often consumed with revenge, they're angry at the world, they have a lot of discontent inside themselves. So for him, it was payback time.
This convicted killer is now behind bars, sentenced to 45 years with a 30-year non-parole period. Tosha is gone, and the scars are clear on Phillip.
I thought, you know, I could read people, but there's no way in the world that I would have picked him.
A thought that keeps him awake at night.
There's only one guilt I got, that I didn't realise something's going on and could have reacted.
And we understand the Director of Public Prosecutions is considering an appeal against the killer's sentence. No decision has yet been made.